Hi, everyone. This is Asim Chandra, your host for the Rev Signal webinar, sponsored by Immersa.ai. And this is our 29th episode. We're going to talk about digits to dollars, maximizing the impact, go-to-market impact with analytics. And it's really interesting. Data analysis can really impact and have a positive impact on your go-to-market efforts. But so many teams struggle to find actionable insights. I recently came across Oz Gunnar in a previous conversation. He's a seasoned business intelligence analyst at the Predictive Index. We'll tell you in a moment what the company does. It's fascinating. It has a long history, lots of customers. Oz brings a wealth of expertise and real-world experience in leveraging analytics to drive go-to-market success. And so during this webinar, we're going to dive in deep into the world of analytics, into sharing some practical tips, some best practices, some powerful techniques from an analytical standpoint, both qualitative and quantitative, and how to bring those two methodologies together. And what are some of the models and in his toolkit that unlock these hidden opportunities for the Predictive Index in their go-to-market efforts. So join me in welcoming Oz. Oz, you are currently on mute, so if you don't mind unmuting your line and share a little bit about yourself as an introduction.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Hello, Asim. Thank you so much for having me today. I am a Senior Business Intelligence Analyst at the Predictive Index at the moment, hailing from Boston, Massachusetts. And I have been in the role for a little over 3 years and in the industry for a bit more than 5 years now.
Awesome. Oz, first of all, I'm going to take it super high level and just start with, why is data analytics important for go-to-market teams?
Yeah, that's a great question. I recently watched a great sort of a legendary lecture by the late Sir Patrick Winston at MIT. It's called How to Speak. And in there, Patrick Winston says that humans only really have one word processor, and we can only process one piece of information at a time. But data analytics sort of gives a lot of information to you in one sitting, just by looking at one visualization, so that you can sort of internalize all of that information in one sitting rather than going record by record, right? So that's why we like aggregating and analyzing data within the context of go-to-market.
So we're parallelizing human intelligence with analytics. That's awesome. I love that response. Okay, so look, I'm going to dive right into the content. I think real quick, though, for folks that are not familiar, can you share 30 seconds on Predictive Index? I know the company has a long and storied history. So just maybe the origin story and what you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely. So Predictive Index is a full award-winning talent optimization platform, is a software platform that basically aligns your business strategy with people strategy. Our flagship product is Hire, a hiring product that comes with a behavioral assessment that has been in the market for over 65 years. It's backed by 65 years of science and data. And right now, Predictive Index, it's based in Boston, and with more than 10,000 clients, 480 third-party partners, basically with over 60 years of science, providing people strategy to more than 10,000 businesses.
Awesome. Okay, so we have about 9 or 10 attendees on the call. If you're joining us now, we're just kicking this off with Oz Gunnar from the Predictive Index. If you have questions for Oz or for myself, please post those in the chat session. We would absolutely welcome your questions. We'll bring them in at the appropriate point during the flow of this conversation. And the goal here is to learn from each other and to share insights with each other. So please jump in with your questions. Please share any insights that you'd like to share with the group. Maybe just if everybody can just start off by sharing where they're joining from, which city and which company, that'd be awesome. Okay, Oz, back to you. So let's go from parallelizing human intelligence with analytics into a little bit more specifics. So I would love to learn more about. I know you're a big metrics guy, and you actually sent me something really cool ahead of this session that I'd love to share with this group here. But tell me a little bit more about how you think about KPIs and metrics, and what KPIs and metrics are important from a GTM perspective. And feel free to share the document that you had brought up earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, there are a ton of revenue and go-to-market KPIs out there. There has been many blog posts written about it. One of my favorite is by Jason Cohen, and the blog post is titled "No, wait, that's the most important go-to-market KPI." So there's a lot of them. I guess they could be, before I share my screen for that sort of cheat sheet, I think we can focus on sort of two categories: one, business or org level metrics, and two is the unit economics metrics. So business level or macro metrics, some simple ones come to mind, such as bookings, ARR, MRR, and annual recurring revenue, monthly recurring revenue, or some companies might use software ACV, which is annual contract value. So those are some of the easy responses. We really like to segment our marketing data and look at high intent, low intent, middle intent sort of leads, and so forth. But my favorite sort of KPI would be the lifetime value to customer acquisition cost, so LTV to CAC. So LTV basically represents the average revenue generated by a customer before they churn, and CAC measures the cost incurred to acquire a paying customer. And a good LTV to CAC ratio is about 3x. So if you're spending, if you're making 3 times the money you're spending to acquire a customer, then you're in a good situation. So I can share my screen. It's basically a very sort of rudimentary cheat sheet, if you will. If it has the sales metrics, org level, and unit economics. I hope you can see it.
Yeah.
We have some retention and churn metrics, some pricing and demand generation, and my favorite is here on the sort of lower left-hand side, anything regarding lifetime value, customer acquisition cost, and LTV to CAC.
Yeah, these are, it's an awesome summary of SaaS metrics for anybody that is interested in tracking these kinds of metrics. And we will make this available from our website once after the webinar is posted. So if anybody's watching this or wants to share this with others, feel free to share the link that will come out to you, but a day after this webinar is recorded. Okay, so Oz, back to some of these metrics that you brought up. What are these the metrics that you typically track, and what sort of led to where you selected this list? So are these the metrics that you're currently tracking? What are the data sources that feed the data into these metrics? And give us a little bit more insight into how you calculate the data here.
Yeah, we are tracking at PI most of these revenue metrics, but then again, it really depends on your business model and what you care about in your business to choose these revenue metrics. For example, if you have a lot of recurring revenue, let's say 95% of the revenue that you're making is recurring, then it might make sense to use recurring metrics such as ARR or MRR. I like that you asked the question about the valuable data sources. I think of go-to-market metrics as, I like to summarize it as anything with a dollar sign. So the primary data sources that we use for these metrics are: 1, marketing automation for your top of the funnel, starting from leads or signups. 2, system of records. That is, anything from opportunity towards down funnel. You're using something like Salesforce. And lastly, for any financial metrics, you would need to have an ERP software such as NetSuite. So marketing automation could be either Pardot, Marketo, or something similar. So you start at the top of the funnel, you would get those data from, let's say, Pardot, and you would calculate these conversion rates. The ones that are going into Salesforce would be qualified leads, right? And then at the end, if you're making revenue, you would get that data from the ERP software.
Got it. No, that's super helpful as kind of data sources. So I think I want to dive into the kind of conversation topic around different modeling techniques, right? So let's start with some of the more common techniques from a data modeling standpoint for qualitative analysis. So, or I guess quantitative analysis around regression, around time series, around market segmentation, clustering, et cetera. These are some of the techniques that you've shared with me in the past, as we've talked about. How do you first maybe just talk through each of these a little bit to orient our audience on what each of these are and how to think about it, and then we can talk a little bit about where to apply it.
Yeah, absolutely. I usually think of them as quantitative analysis part and a qualitative analysis. They both have advantages and disadvantages, so they're not competing with each other, they're complementary to each other. For quantitative analysis, we are using many methods, such as, basically if I would take something like any type of regression, a linear regression, for example, it helps our go-to-market teams understand the relationship between a variable and the results, and so that we can make informed strategic choices. So for example, we're using this method in sales forecasting into the future by looking at the historical data. We're using this for pricing optimization, predicting the lifetime value of a lead or an opportunity, and also predicting the prospect behavior. We're saying, hey, if this prospect is taking these particular actions in the past, what other actions they're likely to take in the future, and what is their likeliness to convert to a paid client. So this is sort of the quantitative part of it. But the quantitative analysis by no means should be the only tool that go-to-market teams use, right? As a business intelligence analyst, I can't, in good conscience, go to my stakeholders in revenue teams and tell them that, this is how we will perform, we'll have to perform because my regression model says so.
Mm-hmm.
It sort of dehumanizes the whole sales process. Sales is almost an art rather than science, because you have the central element of sales is performance. So you can't just go to a revenue team and say, hey, you need to perform better because this is my regression says. So that's why I use quantitative analysis only to validate hypotheses, if I have any, and learn from past data and look in the future into where we could end up. But obviously these quantitative analysis, they disregard many factors such as market conditions, or your new hires that you will be getting, or your sentiment from your prospects.
Yeah. So is it fair to say, and again, I'm going to take the layperson's perspective here to ground the discussion a little bit for a very wide audience that typically listens to this podcast. But from what I understood, Oz, that you described here is regression analysis is looking at what variables impact a certain outcome looking back, and then tries to forecast that forward. And so that can then be applied to things like lifetime value of a customer, or demand forecasting, or kind of looking at the funnel metrics looking forward. But by itself, it is insufficient. Is that kind of the right takeaway from what you described?
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't sort of direct you in the wrong direction, but by itself, it might be an insufficient explanation. I use this in one of the recent projects where we looked at the past prospect behavior on the website. For example, which videos they engaged in, which blogs they read, which pages they visit, and assigned them a percentage value of what we think their probability to convert is.
Got it. And do you view this as the go-to technique for forecasting, or are there other forecasting techniques that you think about as well?
This could be definitely one way of doing it. I tend to think that intuition is really underrated in these situations. Someone like myself, or anyone who has been with a company for more than 3 years, sort of knows the ins and outs of the company, when the company makes more money, like seasonality, when the company will be making more hires, etc. So that's why it's important to validate hypotheses and give you sort of a guidance, as sort of a baseline that you can work off of. We also use some qualitative analysis on top of that brings this to the next level.
Got it. We'll come to the qualitative analysis in a moment, but I think you kind of made a really important point that I hear from my co-founder Aman all the time. He talks about this notion of gut data gut. So you start with some intuition, then you test it with data, but then you don't just assume the data is always accurate. You also then again apply, like build your intuition based on what the data tells you, and then you start over. And it's an iterative process. How does that speak to you? Is that how, like, when you think about, how you run and operate analytics in your current role? Tell us a little bit more about how you go about it.
That resonates with me because my former manager, who's my skip level right now, he had a tremendous impact on my career. He's coming from a banking and M&A background. And basically, we would, like, after I, for example, take a stab at a time series analysis or regression analysis, would literally sit down, do a working session, and I would see that I never really tested my assumptions, because the moment you would see those numbers, if you understand the business really well, some of them don't make any sense, right? So, so that definitely resonates with me. My process, coming to this would be that I have a bunch of assumptions that I know from the company, right? Because I've been here for a while. Then the next stage would be testing those assumptions to see if they're correct or not. And then you build a hypothesis. Your hypothesis could be as simple as, hey, my assumption was that these subset of leads converts at 10%. Now I'm seeing they convert at 5%. So my hypothesis is that something might be wrong in our messaging, right? And then after you form your hypothesis, you can go into doing time series forecasting, right? If they're converting at 5%, there's no reason for you to start your time series analysis at 50%. So I tend to think that intuition, institutional knowledge, and testing assumptions are really underrated in go-to-market modeling.
Got it. Okay, and you mentioned a couple of words here: time series analysis. Can you share a little bit about what that is? When do you use it? Why is it hard? Because I hear that all the time with certain types of data sets and metrics. Keeping track of time series can be challenging.
Yeah, we have an inside joke at our current business intelligence team that we hate pie charts because they don't communicate when that data took place. So we always either use a line chart or bar chart. So time series analysis are good for historical patterns, for forecasting, demand, sales, revenue, anything that is quantitative. Also, if your business is highly seasonal, it can identify seasonality to plan, let's say, targeted promotions and campaigns. We have done this at PI, where we sometimes, like every year, there would be a talent optimization report that we release, and looking at sort of when is the best conversion rates for us, then we would adjust the release of that report. It could also optimize resource allocation, because, for example, this year we planned doing a lot of hires on our sales teams, and you would need time series analysis to forecast when the team's output will decline and when the team's output will increase because of all the onboarding process, right? Team switching and new territories are forming and stuff like that. So time series is really great for these goals.
Awesome. Okay, got it. Okay, now maybe let's switch over to more the qualitative analysis part of things. So again, maybe take a moment to explain what does it mean when we say qualitative analysis versus quantitative, and then we can get into some of the specific techniques around analyzing qualitative data.
Yeah, when I first started owning the revenue metrics at PI, for me, everything was, oh, we need to do this conversion rate, and then we need to hit this number. If we can't hit that number, like, what are we going to do? And then I attended a few sessions with our BDRs, business development representatives, and account executives to see how they approach these sort of problems.
Mhm.
There, I saw that what your audience, what your client, or what your prospect is telling you is really important, and they are not really represented in the quantitative part of your data. So we used the natural language processing analysis, for example, extensively to gain insights into both existing customers to understand our product's pain points, and we use the information to build Predictive Index's PLG product. But we also use this in our prospect conversations.
Mhm.
You might know we are using Gong, which has tremendous NLP features where you can actually identify a set of keywords and see what the sentiment is like. And there are also a lot of open source resources on the internet that you can use to look at sentiment data.
Got it. So there's a great question here from Lina. We'll come back to that in a moment, but let's kind of continue down this path on qualitative analysis. You mentioned natural language processing, and Gong in particular. Are there other types of techniques that you consider in terms of analyzing qualitative data?
Yeah, absolutely. I can speak to a few techniques that we did using R language. For example, while we were, every company sends, pretty much every SaaS company sends a Net Promoter Score survey, and those surveys would be, the responses would be in the thousands, so it's impossible to read them, right? So what we would do as a BI team is to look at those responses, aggregate them, and literally tokenize every single word to understand which words are used together, right? Which noun and adjective pairs are used together. I'm going to give you an example. Around 3 years ago, when I first started this, we got an overwhelming sort of reaction about our product and sometimes how slow it is. So it would literally say slow software. And what we did is we looked at those results and we allocated a lot more resources to that side of the business, and we're not getting that feedback anymore. So there are also a lot of keywords that are used together, words that follow each other, right? Sentences that are used that you can look at to understand what your prospects are thinking or what your existing clients are thinking about your product. One more thing that I used is there are a lot of open source products in the market where you can see they have a huge data set where they assign a sentiment score to every single word. And when you put this into your system, you can sort of score every single comment and see if they are negative sentiment, positive sentiment, or neutral sentiment. Then you would just select the subset of negative sentiment and look what they're talking about. So there are a ton of things that you can derive from sentiment analysis that you can't really tell from a forecasting sheet.
Yeah, makes sense. I love the example you shared about looking for keywords that are close together and then actually having a change in the way that resources are allocated to address that issue. I think that actionability part is so important, is sort of what, at least from an Immersa standpoint, we focus on that quite a bit. But now I'd love to hear a little bit more about the kinds of tools that you use. So you mentioned, obviously, a couple of examples already, but are there other examples of open source or other tools that you use?
Yeah. For starters, I think a good business intelligence tool is a must. It could be, I really don't care what it is, as long as it has the ability to visualize data easily, an ability to create a business logic or calculation easily, and also transform the data easily. So for example, we're using Domo, but this could be Tableau or Looker or any other product. Having this as your single source of truth will increase the trust to your data in your organization. About the natural language processing sources, there is a great website called towardsdatascience.com. There they are sharing the sort of the analysis that they make using these open source methods. There's also a great blog by Julia Silgi, who is a data scientist that basically looks at all the sentiment analysis, sometimes looks at books and literally tokenizes every single word in a book to see like where in the book the sentiment would increase or decrease. So yeah, I can share some of those right after the podcast and in the resources section.
Okay, awesome. We'll capture that in resources and share that out with everybody. I just want to again remind our audience that if you're joining us live and if you have any questions for Oz, please drop those in the chat session and we'll make sure that those questions get addressed during the session as well. We welcome your questions. We want this to be an interactive forum so that we can get the most out of it. But please feel free to jump in. So Lina, thanks for asking that question in terms of what facilitates some of this qualitative and quantitative analysis. Oz, what kind of resources do you typically turn to? I know you write a blog post as well. Maybe you can share and drop the link here in the chat session for the audience here. But are there certain resources that you consider trustworthy and you use to educate yourself on this space?
Do you mean in the SaaS space and analytics in general?
Analytics specifically, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So basically, obviously, being up to date with recent technologies is really important. So blogs like Towards Data Science, and there's actually a great community of R practitioners. I'm an avid user of R out there that are sharing their work. So you can check out those communities. Kaggle is actually a great resource when I'm looking. Let's say I've never worked on a project, let's say a regression analysis regarding leads. I would literally go to Kaggle and see how those people did their regression analysis. That would be very similar to what we are using, and I would literally borrow their techniques to see if it works. You never really reinvent the wheel when it comes to data analytics. Pretty much all of the things that you've done have already been done, but the important part is getting the right method across to your executive team or to your audience, to your internal stakeholders, so it resonates with them and also leads to action.
Got it. I love that point about pretty much anything you want to do has already been done, at least in the analytics domain, but you still have to figure out how it applies in your context. I think that's kind of the key point that you just made. Now, we've talked about quantitative approaches. We've talked about qualitative approaches. How do you bring all of this together into a narrative, that you can confidently present to your exec team and then help drive some decisions off of it? Like what's the approach that you take there first, just from your perspective, but then are there any specific tools or techniques that you use to optimize that storytelling, the narrative around what the data is telling you combined with what you're figuring out from the qualitative side of things?
Yeah, sure. So we would have a ton of data coming in from our systems, right? We would have Azure data lake, piping into Snowflake as the data warehouse, and we would get the data from there into Domo. What you have is literally a blob of data. Some of the data we have is like 50 million rows, and it's impossible to go through it and look at every single record. So what we do is we actually transform that data into a usable format. For example, you would have a bunch of leads or prospects, maybe like 1 million of those, but they're not coming from 1 million different companies, right? There's probably maybe like 5 people in a company signing up for your product. So if you want to do an account-based analysis, you would need to aggregate all of those leads on an account base. So that's why you need to use an ETL tool. Many business intelligence tools provide you with an ETL tool, but Snowflake is a great resource in transforming fast, loads of data in a fast manner.
Got it. Okay, and any advice for people who are choosing to follow in your path in terms of becoming analysts and sort of moving into a business analyst role? Like, what's a good path to get there?
Yeah, a little bit about my background. I'm actually a international relations graduate from Turkey, and I came to the US about 6.5 years ago. And I really didn't want to pursue that. And I enjoyed math and statistics a whole lot. So I literally started taking some courses, both online and at a community college. But the important part was learning a tool. So I learned Tableau really early. And in Tableau, you would be able to create yourself a public profile, sort of like a blog page. And I would literally sit down every day, get some sample case studies, work on them, visualize them beautifully, and then put them in my Tableau. And then, if you're coming from a different background, just like getting your hands dirty, flexing those data muscles a lot would be really helpful. For example, right now I am working a lot on my Excel skills. You can never really learn a lot of Excel. There's always something else to learn. So literally every single evening after work, I sit down. I have a bunch of sample case studies that I bought, and I literally go through them every day so that I can get really fast. So if you have a lot of interest in this, and if you have sort of an elementary understanding of data, which you can get with an online course, with a little bit of preparation and work, I can definitely get there.
Awesome. That's fantastic. One of the things I'm curious about is like, in every domain, in every field, there are some common mistakes that people make as they're starting to figure out how to grow and scale in a particular domain. What are some of the common mistakes that you see around you in terms of the data analytics domain that people make about data, like either poor assumptions or poor use of tools, or mismanaging what techniques to apply in what context? Like, what are some of the things that you've experientially come across and said, oh, I wish I'd done that differently?
I have many stories like that. One mistake that a lot of newcomers are making is they focus a lot on what methods or languages they use. It really doesn't matter as long as you get an analysis done, you get your message across, and people take action. So at Predictive Index, it is very liberating to be able to use a variety of different methods, whatever you like. You will be empowered to use that method as long as you make other people trust in your data and get your message across. Another mistake that I used to do a lot is, let's say an internal stakeholder wanted information from me, needed a little bit of analytics, and I did it, and I sent it to them, but I never really took the time to look at the visualization to understand the patterns. Hey, like, does this align with my expectations? Does this make me surprised, make my eyebrows go up? Or will this make them surprised? I never really asked them, hey, okay, you're asking me this, but do you have any hypotheses that you wanted to test? Because like getting to the root of that question is really important. Otherwise, you will just be blind. So every single time an internal stakeholder asks something from me, I always probe them with sometimes a lot of questions, right? Hey, like, what is the business context around it? Do you have any assumptions? Do you have any hypotheses? Why do you think it's going to be that way? So that I have some knowledge going into that analytics part, and also I can give them some educated opinion and intelligent responses when I'm delivering those.
Got it. You touched on something really important in that commentary, and one of the things that we see from an immersive perspective all the time is this. We talk both to the business side stakeholders, as well as to the data analysts and the data engineers on the other side. And it's interesting that the data analysts, data engineers typically do not have sufficient context for the business side to actually provide the right analysis to them. And then on the business side, they have the business context, but they don't have an understanding of the tools or SQL or R or whatever else, like the right methodologies to speak the language of data and extract out the information that they're looking for. Any thoughts on how to bridge the two worlds?
Yeah, absolutely. This is actually a great segue. I've been wanting to talk about how go-to-market teams are formed, right? Because that's exactly the reason that you're describing. A go-to-market team is often a cross-functional collaboration that gets members from pretty much every function in your company. So I'm going to respond to your question with an example, right? If you're familiar with the lemonade stand method, which is like basically you can almost always explain any business model in a lemonade stand. So let's say you have a product that you want to bring to the market. Let's say it's a specialty black tea, right? What you need to do is basically you need to start with looking at your market, looking at your audience to understand where and whom you can sell it. To do that, you would need a product marketing team. If you're selling black tea, if you don't have a product marketing team, you might as well just go try to sell this on a hot summer day at Fenway Park. But your audience doesn't really want black tea; they want beer and hot dogs, right? So that's why product marketing team does this initial work. Persona ideation, ideal customer profile, user research to understand your market better. And then you would have the product teams. Those would be literally the people who are brewing your tea, your specialty product, and coming up with different products that meet the market needs. They might be coming up with a hot tea and a cold brew tea, right? The important part that they play here is that they have a competitive advantage. In SaaS businesses, this could be your product managers and your engineers. And then obviously you would have the marketing and demand generation teams that will create demand, advertise it, advertise your product across the business. And you would have the sales team, which is naturally who are the people that are actually going to go to your right audience, let's say coffee shops or restaurants that are on the field selling your product. And lastly, you would have us, right? The business intelligence and revenue operations teams who use data analytics to gain insights into market trends. Who is buying that black tea, right? In which territories it's selling really well. Without this context and without this cross-functional collaboration, it is really difficult to bring a product to the market. And I can give you one more story about that.
Yeah.
In my previous company, we used to represent clients who were big luxury yacht salespeople, right? When we sort of got their paid advertising information, we saw that these people were unknowing to them, right? Inadvertently, we're trying to sell these luxury yachts, $250,000 yachts, to zip codes where household income would be around $40,000. It really doesn't make any sense. If you don't know your audience, then you will never likely get even a click from that zip code. So what we did is literally we went to the Esri database, looked at all the zip codes, looked at the household income. If they really enjoy outdoors and fishing, then that's the audience that you want to advertise to. So without this sort of context from all of these teams, it is really hard to bring a product to the market.
Yeah. I think, Oz, that last two examples that you shared are so relevant to the conversations that we have as Immersa with our audience. We're always trying to figure out how do we bridge the gap between the data analyst side of the world or the revenue operations side of the world with the business side of the world. And it's just there's this mismatch of the language that people speak on the two ends. And so trying to bridge that gap is a big part of what we do. But I have absolutely loved this conversation. We could go on for hours. I have so many more questions for you, which I'm sure we'll talk about offline. But if people have on the call or on the podcast today have questions for you, where can they find you? What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have, so I can link my LinkedIn. You could find me as Ozgunnar, so O-Z, and then G-U-N-E-R is my last name. You can also, I linked my personal website, OZENGUNER.com. So that's my first name and last name. You can find sort of my blog and some of my projects that I'm still in the process of uploading. But I try to write sort of at least twice a month so that you can, you can get some insights there. I try to respond to everyone on LinkedIn. I do my best. So feel free to get in touch, send a connection, and I'll be more than happy to share best practices.
Fantastic. Oz, thank you so much for your time. For those of our audience that are joining us live, we will make a recording of this available to you by end of day tomorrow. So feel free to share with your colleagues and friends in the analytics world and the go-to-market world. And if there are any suggestions from the audience on who else we should invite that can speak the language of data analytics, data engineering, please send those recommendations directly to me. You can find me at asim@immersa.co. Super insightful discussion here today, Oz. Thank you for your time today. And everybody else, we're going to be signing off now.